I want to talk to you about something that has just been on my mind. This has been kind of a huge challenge for the West, for Canada, for the US, where I am. I'm the senior editor at Epoch Times, based in Toronto. And thank you. How many subscribers out there? Yes, everyone should be a subscriber, okay? And you'll understand when you get it. Print and digital, of course. Yeah, thank you. I've been listening to people speak today in the broadcast and here on the main stage about the huge challenges facing our society. And a lot of them are things that are internal to the country, okay? A lot of them. What I brought this morning was, I think, the only foreign policy focused panel that we did in the broadcast in the very early morning. And I'll explain to you why this is so particularly important, okay, if we're going to have a future, if we're going to reclaim the future. It was just said that there is very real evil in the world. Let me explain to you what I'm talking about, okay? Back in 2005, there was a man who had a terrible heart condition. This was actually in Israel, terrible heart condition. He was about to die, and he went to his transplant surgeon and told him, I can't wait anymore. There aren't any hearts available. I'm gonna die, and I can get one in 2 weeks in communist China. I can get a heart in 2 weeks, and I'm gonna schedule it. And the transplant surgeon, Jekielek, he looked at him, he said, that's impossible. There's no way that could happen, because you would have to know when someone would be dead to schedule a heart transplant. And there's only really one way to do that, and that's to make them so. But the person, desperate, went and came back with a new heart. And this is one of the pieces of evidence that convinced me back in 2006, almost 20 years ago, that there was something horrible happening in communist China, a transplant industry that was not based on voluntary donors, but instead based on prisoners of conscience being, in effect, murdered for their organs. There were newspapers that would advertise these 2-week times. I even know an instance of someone getting a new liver in 3 days, that quickly, because they created a database, right? So going back a little bit, you remember in 1989, there was a student movement in communist China, and it was crushed. Tiananmen Square massacre. If you're not familiar with it, look it up, please, okay? Communist societies always have to have an enemy. In 1989, it was students looking for democracy. That movement was crushed. Okay, in 1999, there was a spiritual movement called Falun Gong that became wildly popular, an extremely grassroots movement, I might add, which is very relevant to the discussions we're having today. Bubbled up, 70 to 100 million people were practicing truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, these core principles. And the Chinese regime decided this is something that isn't controlled by us. This is something that isn't within our totalitarian, uber-hierarchical structure, so we're gonna crush it. And they put millions of people in the system. And this is when that transplant industry in communist China grows exponentially or near exponentially. So you can imagine, right? 70 to 100 million people become illegal. Then there's a huge campaign the regime wages, controlling all media, right? Everybody here knows what control of media can bring, right? Well, this is at a level none of us have even ever seen. Demonizing these people, saying they're evil. Actually, straight out of 1930s Germany, we're talking about that level of propaganda. And what we have is a situation where a whole lot of people resist. They don't want to be destroyed. They're not willing to give up their faith. And they end up in prisons. They end up being tortured, in some cases to death. So people are disappearing, an incredibly vulnerable population, right? And that's exactly when this transplant industry explodes in communist China, where people from all over the world, if they have the cash, can go. And by the way, some of you have heard about this Xi Jinping Putin hot mic moment. How many people have heard about that? Great. It was shocking to me, okay, that you have Vladimir Putin saying we can perhaps achieve immortality through continual organ transplantation, and Xi Jinping responding, maybe 150 years is the target. I mean, having worked on this for 20 years, it was a surreal moment. They just told us they do it. You know, one of the conspiracy theories out there is that they did it intentionally to signal to people who are that morally broken that they'd be willing to do it, to go and see a person, to take an organ from a person that's being killed for that purpose. Okay, why am I talking about this? We've vastly misunderstood the reality of communist China. And I want to highlight here, I'm not talking about the Chinese people, right? Chinese people, I think, the Chinese nation without communism would actually, I think, give the West a real run for its money. Incredibly hardworking people, especially when rooted in that traditional culture which made, China incredible. It's a huge problem that we misunderstood the reality of what a totalitarian regime is, that it breaches no dissent of any sort, no independent civil society. It crushes it, right? They convinced us that they're authoritarian, that they're kind of like Taiwan, that they can change if we put enough money in there, if we engage enough, we invest enough, if we share our legal system enough, all of those things with never any intention of actually doing that, because in that system, the Chinese Communist Party is always supreme. So here's the challenge that I want to kind of issue to the room. We have so many things that we need to fix in our society, but misunderstanding the intentions of a totalitarian regime which is jealous and can't possibly tolerate freedom at all, right? Because any semblance of freedom is always a threat to its existence, right? In terms of external realities that challenge our future, a free future for us, that's at the top of the list. And I think if we can understand this, right? I'll give you another example in how this is used. A number of people have been thinking a lot about this assassination of Charlie Kirk in the United States. It's almost like a strange inflection point, which we could discuss in more detail on another panel. But what happened, of course, is people were shocked and frustrated and angry, okay? Of course. And there's this process, there's a grieving process, there's a process of getting over that anger, right? Charlie Kirk was really good at something. He was good at going into the belly of the beast, going into situations where he knew some people viewed him as the enemy. He didn't actually view them as the enemy. He viewed them as people that could be talked to, could be convinced. And that heart is actually what helped shift people. That's my view and a number of other people's view that I've talked to. So this is actually the kind of a powerful testament to what we can do, how we can shift society, right? Except so many of us in the United States also had that reaction. Wait a second. They killed this guy that was trying to do dialogue, that was trying to communicate. Maybe that failed. Maybe the time for communication is over, actually. Maybe we need to fight now. There's no other choice, right? And in my view, that is being kind of stuck in a place of grieving. You haven't reached for your Bible, or you haven't talked to the person that you go to advice, or your pastor, or your family member, or your friend. You haven't thought through. You haven't had the chance to go through it. And then you're sitting in your social media silo, perhaps on TikTok, okay? And this is where, TikTok, up to now, is a premier tool of the Chinese Communist Party, right? A tool that's controlled directly by the regime. And with plausible deniability, just upping the algorithm a little bit to push these kinds of messages into the algorithm could perhaps, and I've seen this, right? And I've seen this happening with many people, kind of lock them into that state. The time for communication, the time for discussion is over. But that's kind of the real lesson is opposite. And this is what the totalitarians in communist China and some of the proto-totalitarians here in the West would want. They want to see two sides that are so radicalized that they have to fight each other, okay? So that's the power that a totalitarian regime can inject into our own society. We have to be very, very mindful of this. So bottom line, as we finish here, in terms of external threat reality, I hope that we can, at a grassroots level, educate ourselves about what a totalitarian regime like Communist China is capable of, and understand that it seeks to subvert the society and guard ourselves. And we can do this at a grassroots level, talking to each other, understanding this face of that kind of evil as this organ harvesting. I think that's a way that we can actually guard our future and reclaim our future, or a piece of it. Thank you so very much for listening right now.